Hey, look, he's got gradual damage. But where's the animal companion? Tidebringer Kaito's Trustmaster reward is Explosive Nice Attack, High HP, and Defense. When equipped to a Kaito, they get to absorb water damage. But even if it's not equipped to Kaito, your unit still gains a neat Limit Burst regen. His Super Trustmaster reward is a two-handed katana with high attack. When equipped to a Kaito, he'll get an extra 500 attack and a 300% boost to his HP. Not only that, it also grants a double demon and fairy killer without any limits. Onto his active abilities. Kaito's attacks deal physical damage that partially ignore the enemy's defense, chains Bolting Strike, and can scale with morale. Exvius Infusion imbues water onto Kaito, boosts his water damage by 50%, and inflicts a 135% water imperil. A Man of Few Words boosts his attack and defense by 300%, grants him a powerful demon and machine killer buff, a 90% general mitigation buff that lasts for 2 turns, and fills the morale gauge if applicable. Cascading Slash deals damage, boosts Kaito's accuracy by 100%, fills his limit burst gauge by 1/6 if his limit burst gauge is at max level, and fills the morale gauge. Tranquil Flow deals less damage, lets Kaito evade up to 5 attacks, and fills the morale gauge. Receding Tide grants your team a powerful machine and dragon killer buff, reduces physical damage from those species by 55%, boosts your team's water resistance by 100%, gives them a strong HP barrier, and lets them evade 4 attacks. Swelling Current switches out the species for demons and fairies, and amplifies your team's water damage by 45%. Pure Liquid Infusion can be used twice per battle. It boosts Kaito's limit burst damage by 250%, fills its limit burst gauge, boosts its damage modifier, lets your team absorb water damage, and imbues water onto them. Passives. With his Trustmaster reward or Super Trustmaster reward equipped, Kaito gets boost to his chain damage, limit burst damage, MP regen, and changes his normal attack to Cleansing Edge, which is a dispel that chains of Bolting Strike and gets stronger with morale. The man has strong physical killers against a given species, a small boost to his limit burst gauge fill rate, a nice boost to his limit burst regen, and a big boost to his physical evasion. In fact, if you give him his 7-star Super Trustmaster reward, he'll easily hit 100%. He prefers to carry a single weapon, preferably a katana, and meets half the capture chain limit boost. When he enters the battle, he'll automatically activate Uncharted Depths, which inflicts an 80% full break and a gradual damage debuff. In Clash of Wills, depending on the level of your morale gauge, he'll get access to certain abilities. When it's above 0%, he'll get Torrential Bladestorm, which gets stronger if your morale is above 100%, and Torrential Devastation, which gets stronger when your morale is below 100%. When your morale gauge is higher than 100%, he'll get access to Torrential Downpour, which will grant your team a tremendous double killer against demons, machines, dragons, and fairies, and lowers your enemy's accuracy by 50%, and Torrential Force 1, a cooldown ability that lets Kaito evade 2 attacks, strengthens the damage modifier of Torrential Bladestorm, and automatically activates Torrential Force 2 on the next turn, which stacks the same thing, but automatically activates Torrential Force 3 on the next turn, which stacks the same thing. But hold on to your horses, we've got Torrential Force 4, which stacks the same thing, and that's pretty much maximum stack. At EX plus 2, he gets Clear Current, which is essentially Warring Spirit plus a permanent 20% general mitigation buff. At EX plus 3, he gets 500 attack. Let's look at its limit burst. It dispels your enemies, inflicts a 25% katana imperil, deals weak physical damage unless you're fighting a machine, and then caps with a powerful blow that partially ignores the enemy's defense. Time to change forms. Tidebringer Kaito has a true Brave Shift, which has no limitations whatsoever. Onto his active abilities. Kaito's attacks still have the same features, except they no longer partially ignore the enemy's defense. Destabilizing Form inflicts an 85% full break, lowers your enemy's accuracy by 25%, might inflict up to 4 random status ailments, and fills the morale gauge. Deep Submersion Plus is a stronger attack that inflicts a 25% katana imperil, an 87% full break, and fills the morale gauge. Crashing Wave removes any buffs, then inflicts an 88% full break, a 135% water imperil, and for the next 2 turns, will apply the same effect again. Unpredictable Tide can be used once per battle. It reduces the turn duration of an enemy's stat buffs by 3 turns. Undulating Waves can also only be used once per battle. This ability increases the turn duration of breaks and elemental imperils inflicted on the enemy by 3 turns. Passives. With his Trustmaster reward or Super Trustmaster reward equipped, Kaito gets access to 2 offensive abilities when the morale gauge is above 150%. The first, Deadly Stream, inflicts a full 25% weapon imperil and a 90% defense break. The second, Natural Flux, deals about the same damage, but lowers all elemental resistance by 125%, except for water. That's 150%, and inflicts a 90% Spirit Break. The Lock passive also gives him a Guts buff, a tremendous boost to his limit burst damage, and changes his normal attack to Purifying Edge, which is actually the same thing as his base form. Aside from that, there aren't any other significant changes. Let's look at his limit burst. It inflicts a 30% Katana Imperil, lowers water resistance by 140%, inflicts a 90% attack and magic break and an 88% defense and spirit break, then deals damage that scales of morale. It also happens to chain with Stormseeker Esther's limit burst, which would make him look so much cooler if they actually told you that. Let's rank Brave abilities. I'd prioritize Inner Serenity to raise the passive buffs, and raising the other two just lowers its MP costs. Time to make a damage rotation. On turn 1, cast Exvius Infusion, a mana few words, and Pure Liquid Infusion. Feel free to delay the Magnus ability for either of the killer cooldowns first if they'll help. On turn 2, switch forms, and activate his limit burst. On turn 3, switch back, and triple cast Cascading Slash. On turn 4, do the same thing. On turn 5, activate his Brave Shift and use his limit burst once again. Repeat the rotation from here. Now, in an actual fight with Clash of Wills, you have access to these extra abilities. Torrential Devastation will be a better pick when your morale is below 100%, and above, you want to combine Torrential Force 1 and Torrential Blade Storm. Obviously, you can't forget about Deadly Stream or Natural Flux either, but those require a morale level above 150%. So, EX2. EX plus 2 can grant him an instant limit burst and a permanent 20% general mitigation buff. Personally, I don't think that mitigation will be vital for the time being, as I'm hoping you have a unit with better mitigation buffs, but an instant limit burst can let you apply strong debuffs at the start of the fight. His Super Trustmaster reward is a strong two-handed katana, especially for Kaito himself, so it's certainly not a bad incentive. EX plus 3 is 500 attack, which isn't much, but you do get a second copy of his Nice Vision card. It's still pretty expensive though. So how good is Tidebringer Kaito? He's got 3 different rows, and with a true Brave Shift, it's relatively easy to access each end of his skill set. Just with that, he's certainly an excellent unit, but let's take the time to scrutinize each row separately too. We'll start with support. Currently, the best water supporters in the game are Lord of the Seas Nikou and the EX plus 3 Yoshikiri. Kaito can easily match the level of water support as the former requires a Brave Shift limit burst, while the latter requires EX Awakenings. However, it should be noted that Kaito can't actually imbue water on your team unless he uses Pure Liquid Infusion, and while that has 2 uses, the imbue only lasts for 2 turns. Still, there are quite a few units that can imbue water anyways, so you can just leave that to them. In terms of killers, it's mainly physical, but in Clash of Wills, he does get Torrential Downpour, which can provide the highest killer values outside of shenanigans if Mastermind's on. Outside of killer buffs and water amplifications, he also provides physical mitigation against the same species, water resistance, a HP barrier, and evasion stacks, though the latter 2 effects are on a cooldown. Now, what about as a debuffer? Kaito stands out as the first unit to provide a 90% break for every stat, and a weapon imperil for every weapon. But there are caveats. First, every other weapon imperil that's not related to katanas gets the same treatment as his 90% defense and spirit breaks. They can only be accessed during Clash of Wills. Otherwise, you have to stick with 88% breaks, which, you know, pretty terrible, as they're not as cool as 90%. Now, while his 90% attack and magic breaks are available through his limit bursts, it's pretty easy for him to fill it within the effect turn duration, so it's hard to complain. His best weapon and water imperil is tied to that limit burst too, only beaten out by his 150% water imperil tied to the 90% defense break only accessible through Clash of Wills. Even if you can't use his limit burst, he has 87% breaks on a regular ability, and 88% on a cooldown. And if you want to extend certain debuffs, you've got Undulating Waves. This is pretty amazing. For instance, if you're not in Clash of Wills and have another 90% breaker, you can extend those breaks by bringing Kaito along. Or, if you have a strong Elemental Imperil unit but no EX plus 3, then you can bring Kaito along to extend those debuffs. The other Magnus ability, Unpredictable Tide, decreases stat buff duration, which would be cool if buff removal weren't a thing, though it might have greater significance if this applies to non-dispellable stat buffs. Lastly, how's his damage output? It's... well, honestly it's a bit average, and that's when he's using water, his forte. In normal content, he certainly doesn't reach the strength of our premium units, and in Clash of Wills, well, he's stronger than Chao and Fravia. Which, while that isn't bad, I'm well aware the community tends to have absurdly high expectations. He is flexible though, which is always an advantage. Ultimately, Kaito is a great unit who serves best as a secondary damage dealer. You'll definitely appreciate his debuffs, new effects, and the ease at which he pairs with many units. And while the support is admittedly niche, it's certainly potent. Just like that, he's a solid unit, but he's even better in Clash of Wills, especially when you have the morale advantage. He does have a few flaws though. I'll ignore the things he doesn't have, because that's unfair. But I do have to note that his limit burst damage buff is tied to a team-wide water imbue, meaning if the enemy's not weak to water, you might have some trouble once you activate the buff. Luckily, we do have quite a few strong limit burst damage buffers, so it's not like there's no way to work around that. Also, that cute Anemo doesn't show up in his animation, so that's really disappointing. Also, he doesn't have a story event. Yeah, I think he's pretty good. Thanks for watching, and if you liked this video, leave a like and subscribe. Comment below if you plan to get Tidebringer Kaito. I myself definitely plan to, though I'm not quite sure if I should go for the full step for the equipment or save 3,000 lapis and set my sights low. Oh well, that's another video.